The facts are absolutely startling. A research think tank in the United States called Dartnell found that 9 out of 10 salespeople have finished their sales process before 80% of their customers are ready to buy. Quite frankly, I find that statistic to be a bit clunky, so let's break that down. Most salespeople have finished selling before most of their customers are ready to buy. Fellow Toastmasters, it's a pleasure to be here to deliver to you my presentation titled, How People Buy. There's been some further research done by a company called Qualtrics. It's another research think tank. They found that 40% of the average American's workday is spent trying to move other people. So that could mean persuading, convincing, selling. The ideas are trying to move other people. 40%, so 24 minutes out of every hour of the average American worker, and I think could also be argued for Canada, is spent trying to move people. Today's presentation is going to talk about how people buy, because if we understand the motivations, if we understand the psychology behind the way people buy, it will ultimately help us as salespeople, or just as people in general, move others. Most of this presentation will come from the context of sales. However, we've already agreed that sales pervades so much of our lives. I want to start by telling you a story of a man named Kevin Davis. Kevin was a sales manager for a company based out of Utah. This was back in the early 90s. And Kevin was on a layover. He had a full day layover in San Francisco, and he thought he'd make best use of his time, and he'd stroll around checking out some cool shops. He found himself in the Castro district at a really eclectic used bookstore, looking for something to stimulate him as he was on his business trip. He stumbled across a book called Why People Buy by John O'Shaughnessy. And it struck him because for all of his sales career, he'd always been reading books about how to sell, but never considered much about the reasons why people buy. He read this book and he had a major epiphany. Thinking like this just hadn't really been done. It wasn't part of the business culture, especially as it related to sales. So he commissioned some research. He worked with Stanford and Columbia universities, as well as Dartnell Research, as well as Huthwaite Research think tanks. And all 4 of them came back with the exact same information. They came up, it became very apparent that people go through a very consistent set of steps when they're making a buying decision. And I don't just mean some people, I mean all people. Men, women, no matter how old you are, what religion you subscribe to, everybody is the same. So the idea then is if we understand how people buy, then we'll ultimately have an opportunity to make some very successful relationships. The product of all this research is after that quote that I just read to you, is illustrated in the above graphic, which I'll spend the majority of this presentation explaining. The balance of this presentation will unfold with me starting with the idea of change. Every buying decision starts with some sort of change. If no change happens, then everything might as well just stay the same. And when I talk about change, it could be anything from the economy to money to thoughts. Some sort of change always sparks the motivation to buy. So it always starts right here. And if you look on the outer part of the wheel that I'm presenting you, you see the word need. And so when we talk about change, we're talking about somebody's needs changing. And to further that, after they've identified that there's a change, the next step is what we call discontent. So this is the person saying, I'm not okay with the change as it is. That discontent doesn't work for me, so I want to do something different. At this point, it's probably healthy to remind you that there's 2 reasons, maybe not remind you, maybe explain to you that there's 2 reasons why people make a buying decision. The first is either to seize an opportunity. The second is to avoid a problem. Those are the only 2 reasons why people will ever make a buying decision. So discontent becomes relevant because the gravity of which that discontent is understood by the buyer will be ultimately their motivation towards making a buying decision. So somebody in the sales capacity really needs to work hard at drawing out that discontent to help remind them why it is that they should make why it is that they should fulfill on the need in the first place. To help provide some context here, I'd like to give an example, something that works very well for Toastmasters. So let's say that there is a person who's working in an administrative capacity for the provincial government, and they get a promotion to a management role. And this promotion involves a lot of public speaking. Okay, they've had a change in their career, they've got a new role that involves public speaking. The discontent that they experience is, I gotta speak to a lot of people, and I don't know what I'm doing. Once that need is understood, then they move to the next step of this process, which we call the by-learning process, called research. This is where they're learning about what's going to ultimately fill their need. This research can take on a variety of forms. In the case of our Toastmaster example, they could be looking for different public speaking groups. They could be looking at different types of Toastmasters groups. Some that meet in the morning, some that meet in the evenings, some that meet on the weekends, some that meet twice a week, some that meet once a week, some that meet once a month. There's so many variables out there that they're worth researching. It is incumbent then on the salesperson to draw out the criteria at which they will ultimately make a buying decision, or ultimately it's important that the salesperson understand the criteria that is important to the solution that they're looking to achieve. So if it's getting good at public speaking, then it's about finding out all the elements that are important to them in order to have a fulfilling group to work with and a solution to their challenges that they've identified. The next step, after they've done all their research and they've learned as much as they possibly can about different options, is they start to compare. They start to say, well, this group has these benefits but these drawbacks, and this group has this benefits and these drawbacks. And so they start to do this weighing game based on all the research that they've done. Now at this point, from a salesperson's perspective, it's really important that they understand the strengths and weaknesses of their offering. There's a quote by a guy named Sun Tzu who wrote The Art of War back in 500 BC. He said, if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Which says that the salesperson needs to understand what makes their offering so good and what makes it not so good for them to effectively present to the person that's looking to make a buying decision, so that they can accurately understand what's going to be the best fit for them. Once the buyer has effectively made their comparison, they weighed all their options, they move to the next step of the buy-learning process, which is the buy stage. So this is where they're going to make a buying decision. They've done a needs analysis, they've learned all they need to learn, and now they're at a point where they're going to make a buying decision. Now, the next piece here is a fear piece. This is where emotion takes over in the buying process. When people are buying something, or in this case, joining a club, there's a small risk involved. They're going to devote time, they're going to devote money to a group that they want to ultimately help solve a problem of theirs. So there's some anxiety, there's some stress that goes along here. This is common for all of us. Anyone that's bought a house, anyone that's bought an appliance, there's some risk, there's some stress, there's some anxiety that goes along with it. I would suggest that in helping people buy, what we need to do is stay close to them. Help them through this emotion. We've all been through it before, and we know that it's that caring word or conversation that will help us move through this. In our example of the Toastmaster who just got the promotion, I would suggest that having a distinguished Toastmaster sit down with this new applicant, talking through what the realities of being in Toastmasters would be very helpful. Once that's effectively done and they're ready to make their buying decision, now they're in the commitment stage. And really what that means is working out the terms of the agreement. If we're buying a house, it'll be how much? When do we get possession? Do we get the washer and dryer? All those elements. In the case of Toastmasters, there's not as much negotiation that happens. There's not as much commitment. There's not as much terms we have to discuss. Really, it's a yes or a no. But regardless, they're making a commitment as they're in this stage of the buy-learning process. Once they've made a commitment, they go to the last stage of the buy-learning process, which is called value. This is where they start to assess the expectations that they have of this purchase. They start saying, I expected my vocabulary to get stronger. I'd expect that the nerves would calm down when I was in front of a group. All these expectations are judged against what they thought they were going to get. In a sales context, most salespeople are gone. They're off to find a new prospect and do something different. I would suggest whether you're a salesperson or just a person at large, this is where we need to stay incredibly close. Help them through this process, help them feel comfortable with the decision that they've made. The final stage of this process is what we call satisfaction. This is where they evaluate, were my expectations met? If so, I'm going to come back and renew for the next 6 months, or I'm going to tell a friend to join the club, or whatever the case might be. Notice how after satisfaction comes another change. There's always something new that will happen in life. So in the case of our Toastmaster example, once this manager gets to know some of his or her fellow management team, maybe they refer a friend and they both start coming to Toastmasters, and then we go through a new stage of the BioLearning process. In conclusion, whether we're a salesperson or whether we're just a person living on this planet, we're making decisions all the time. We're constantly making choices, we're getting moved by others, and I would suggest that having an appreciation for how people buy will not only make us better buyers, but also help salespeople become better salespeople. Ultimately, I think we have greater harmony between us as people. Madam Toastmaster.